English translation, 18th contact. Thursday, 15th May 1975, 2134 HRs.
Before we discuss other things today, I would like to proceed with the spiritual teaching, as it is the most important thing of all. The human being should try to react to the word or the term creation as if something very beautiful or good is being referred to, through which a change should be effected in his or her thinking. But since this does not happen, insofar he or she has not recognized the creation for what it really is. But how can the word and the designation creation attain such a deep significance for the human being that a change in his or her entire psychological way of behaving occurs? In his or her emotional awareness, his or her feeling of life, his or her ways of reacting, if he or she does not constantly and repeatedly ponder over the nature of the creation? The human being should try quite simply to bring certain designations of characteristics, which are applicable in regard to the nature of creation, like ever-present, almighty, and all-knowing, into association with the word or the designation creation. The everyday human being, as well as the common human, the so-called atheist, the egoist and materialist, the agnostic, find the word creation highly uninteresting. Yet why? To them it is entirely unknown, and they have no idea what the creation essentially is. But so it is with very many human beings with the term creation. Thousands of millions of human beings who are led into delusion by religions do not understand the word creation. If they pronounce the unreal religious name God, then they are of the gone astray view that in this way the creation would be referred to. Yet what an evil, irrational teaching that is. Therefore, it is very important to know as much as possible about the nature of the creation, and to experience it so that the word becomes meaningful, lifts one up inwardly, and leaves an impression as soon as it is heard. The experience reveals that the creation is unending beauty, a beauty above all beauty, boundless, intense happiness without end, essence of wisdom, knowledge, ability, truth, and absolute distinctness. Once that is recognized by the human being, then he or she instantly traces every one of his or her joys back to its origin, to the infinite joy of creation. Wherever he or she sees something beautiful, be it a flower, an animal, or a human being, or anything else, he or she thus instantly brings it into association with the unending beauty of the creation herself. Wherever the human being sees cognition reach expression in one form or another, in an impressive and uplifting manner, there he or she knows that it has its roots in the endless cognition that is the creation. Wherever life stirs, be it even in just the tiniest being, in a creature, such as, for example, the microbe, there, behind this life, he or she glimpses the endless, the eternal, and the creational. From that, he or she attempts to deepen and expand his or her understanding and feeling by thinking the nature of the creational and its inescapable presence over, at any time and in any space, in many kinds of ways, in daily life and experience. The creation exists in every human being as a part piece of himself or herself. Once this thought has deeply penetrated the human being and become his or her experience, then any fear and all doubt in him or her disappear. Once he or she knows that the creation is all-knowing and almighty, then he or she gains peace and security in his inner self and is immune from stupid thoughts and wrong feelings. Repeated pondering over the ever-presence, truth, essence of wisdom, and the ability and knowledge of the creation as permanently eternal, as dignity and value, allows the word and the designation creation to become something very meaningful in the human being, something which evokes transformations in the feelings and transformations in his or her manner of thinking. The more his or her intelligence is effective in this direction, the more it gains radiating light, the more powerful his or her personality becomes, and the more prosperous his or her whole life and work becomes. Again and again, the human being who lives in clarity of consciousness produces in himself or herself anew the strong, fine spiritual perception that the creational is far more real than that which his body feels. This fine spiritual perception incessantly rules the human being who lives for the spirit. The creational takes possession of his or her consciousness, which is why his or her senses are full of peace, strength, joy, knowledge, essence of wisdom, truth, and hope. All measures taken by the normal human beings in their material intellectual thinking to attain peace, happiness, and strength always turn out to be deceptive, while this permanent controlledness of the human being who is living according to the Spirit is pulsed through by the dynamic power of the creation. The human being who lives for the Spirit is very dynamic in all things. He or she incessantly attempts to reach his or her fulfillment as quickly as possible. Therefore, as long as he or she lives, he or she uses the time with all the energy available to him or her for turning himself or herself to the creational ability. He or she will never allow this undertaking to be lost. All kinds of things can happen over time, yet his or her desire for the creational will never disappear in him or her. He or she may encounter obstacles, suddenly have no sense and taste anymore for necessary material things, but he or she never loses the taste and sense for the creation, because he or she knows that the creation embodies the true being. Only those human beings harvest enormous spiritual and consciousness-based fruits who fight hard for their consciousness-based and spiritual good and progress, for knowledge, truth, logic, essence of wisdom and love, because these do not simply fall into their laps. First, before the first results can be obtained, it is necessary to learn the spiritual intellectual manner of thinking, that is to say, the path of the creational thinking, and to recognize its absolute correctness and distinctness. However, once these initial successes come to light, then the recognizer steps ahead with great strides and widens himself or herself in spirit and consciousness into a factor of might. Only through this do already recognized facts, the knowledge, the truth, logic, essence of wisdom and love, which must, however, first be created in a hard way, become a matter of implicitness. Yet the path does not end at this point, because the further searching, inquiring, developing, and the further recognizing lead into the boundless duration of time. All sorts of things may happen in the course of time and keep the human beings from doing what they had planned to do. Yet the human being who lives in accord with the Spirit knows no bounds and does not allow himself or herself to be led away from his determinations by any kind of events or bad future prospects. For him or her, the future already exists in the present. So everything must be done here and now in order to achieve the highest spiritual state and highest state of consciousness. He or she does not know the anxiety of the future and does not know the anxiety about the future, because they exist only in a material intellectual way of thinking, but never in the spiritual intellectual thinking, in which the future is as present as the present itself. Thereby the human being who lives in accord with the Spirit can and is able to solve the problems of tomorrow and the day after tomorrow already here and now, and to steer them into the desired paths. To think for and with, the Spirit brings only advantages to every life form. Therefore the human being should raise himself more and more, through intensive seeking and inquiring, into the state of the spiritual thinking and into the knowledge about the creational truth and essence of wisdom. He or she should time and again create in himself or herself the strong perceiving in a fine spiritual wise that something is there that gives him or her immeasurable power and frees him or her from unreal assumptions. The truth of the creation. Again and again and again, the human being should create in himself or herself the strong perceiving in a fine spiritual wise that he or she is in the ocean of the creational light, its essence of wisdom, its knowledge of the truth, of the logic, and of the love, which only in its entirety enables the being for him or her. The joy of the human being who is turned to the creation consists in attesting his or her veneration to the creational and to the creational. This by accepting the almighty will in the creational laws and by making the absolute distinctness of these laws one's own destiny and by beneficially evaluating them. He or she expresses his or her dedication to the laws through the learning and utilization of all spiritual and consciousness-based facts, but never through belief, assumptions, serving, and submissiveness. The only way to learn is made up of the unremitting making of efforts and striving to attain higher spiritual and consciousness-based cognitions, and the application of the abilities which have been brought to unfolding through this. Of decisive significance thereby are patience and endurance and the development of higher understanding, recognition and application of the cosmic and universal love, deepening of the spiritual and consciousness-based knowledge and ability, as well as the shutting off of material intellectual thought potency such as egoism, materialism, pride, envy, greed, and jealousy, and so forth, because only this guarantees the recognition and following of the creational laws. The human being who thinks spiritually is permanently striving to direct the creation to him or herself and to make it recognizable within him or herself, this in such a way that he or she tries to make possible what is impossible for normal human beings, and indeed with success. Day after day, month after month, and year after year, the human being connected to the spirit calls upon the creative and thereby gains knowledge, essence of wisdom, love, logic, truth, and power, until he or she finally experiences the creational within him or herself and is able to evaluate it, whereby it becomes more real to him or her than the feeling of his or her body. While he or she is in contact with other human beings and speaking to them, he or she sees only the creational in front of him or her. While he or she sees others in front of him or herself, he or she sees only the creational in them, because for him or her the creational always takes first place. For him or her, the creational is the greatest among all things, which is why everything in him or her is confronting itself with the creational, and why material things are no longer able to awaken a craving in him or her. He or she is no longer exposed to material temptations, since what he or she has inherent in him or herself as spiritual and consciousness-based knowledge and ability is his or her conversational partner and his or her guide. He or she speaks and converses with it, and he or she lives with it in the given laws of the creation. This way of living means the being in truth, and this being is incomparably more beautiful than this universe's most beautiful manifestation. Nothing is able to any more longer tempt a human being developed in this way, not the greatest wealth of the world, and not a death threat of evil-minded creatures. His or her inner wealth in the creational is inexhaustible and immortal, and nothing is able to awaken any kind of fear in him or her, because that with which he or she lives and enlivens his or her being is unending might. Therefore, nothing is able to mislead him or her to untruth and falseness, for his or her whole being is unending truth through the creational recognition. Nothing is able to guide him or her into the unreal in the darkness of thoughts, from external powers leading into delusion, because every fraction of a second of his or her spiritual intellectual thinking is unending light. Nothing is able to change his or her being sense of the truth or make him or her unhappy, since he or she lives in the being of the creation and in her sense, and he or she lives in unending joy. If, however, the human being has an evil or negative attitude towards the spiritual things of life, him or herself and the creation, then nothing at all will prosper for him or her. Even a very favorable circumstance, which would otherwise be very valueful, becomes a source of unfortune and unpeace for him or her, if his or her attitude is only material intellectual and his or her thoughts and feelings also influence the environment in this form. Even if the human being in question pursues no matter how good intentions, the result in this case will be completely negative. However, for the human being living in accord with the Spirit, all and everything will always be the right circumstance for inner growth and a very good opportunity to pay tribute to the creational in every form. In truth, only that human being who permanently carries and maintains high and noble spiritual thoughts and spiritual feelings in him or herself is great, and one can only call that human being creative, who permanently lives and thinks with the consciousness of the creational in himself or herself. That means that materially, intellectually great human beings may be just as completely uncreational and spiritually absolutely insignificant as fomenters of peace, religious saints, helpers in distress, misery and illness, and last but not least, those who are at the forefront in wars, etc., and provide medical services, etc. Those kinds of human beings are most often only driven by thirst for adventure. Pity and self-pity and other false material intellectual thoughts and feelings resulting from them, without possessing the slightest recognition of the creational in themselves. Very often they are led into the unreal by unreal religions, which preach false love for the next one and equally false godly teachings and formulas of submissiveness. Yet what is the difference between such life forms and the human being who lives in accord with the Spirit? In general, the normal human being allows him or herself to be led and overcome by lower material intellectual impulsations. When he or she once has good feelings, then these are never permanent and soon disappear again to, again, make room for lower impulsations. On the other hand, the human being who lives for the Spirit never lets even the smallest creational impulsations fade out. Rather, he or she embraces them and expands them endlessly. Low impulsations find no anchorage in him or her, since the waters of essence of wisdom and knowledge in him or her are too deep for a low and short anchor chain to be able to reach their ground. The human being who lives in accord with the Spirit enduringly tries to maintain him or herself at all times and under all circumstances in the realm of swinging waves of creational impulsations. Should these once be endangered by any influences, then he or she refers to the creation in highest potency, and in so doing, protects him or herself in her highest power of swinging waves from the negative. He or she proceeds in this manner until the creational V-Sin has produced the absolute distinctness of the defense against the negative in him or her. The human being is always bearer of something or other. Many bear depressing feelings in themselves, others grief, worries, problems, hopes, and other thoughts of material intellectual nature. Also, anxieties and imaginations of pictures of any kind, good as well as ugly ones, belong in his material intellectual thinking. But the human being, who lives in accord with the Spirit, is bearer of the creational, of the spiritual. He or she is a carrier of creation, a conscious bearer of spirit, because he or she all the time carries the knowledge and ability of the creational laws in him or herself. And the more the old nature of the material intellectual thinking wants to make him or her the bearer of its illogicality, the more he or she works intensively to make the creational prevailing in him or herself and to anchor it firmly. Even thoughts of the most negative, which come and want to destroy his or her spiritual intellectual thinking, he or she immediately transforms into creational power and essence of wisdom. In this way, he or she turns everything into the creational and carries it within him or herself as a block of might. Thereby, he is a walking temple of creation. The intelligences of the human beings living for the creation become more and more spiritualized and penetrate deeper and deeper into the spiritual consciousness. The human being who lives in accord with the Spirit penetrates ever deeper into all things with his or her cognitive capability and comprehends the warmth of the fire of the creational presence in everything. Thereby, the spiritually thinking human being recognizes and becomes conscious of the power and the truth of the creational presence everywhere. That which therefore remains unrecognized by the everyday sensory perceptions is perceived spiritually consciously by the human being who lives in accord with the creation. He or she therefore always sees in all things and life forms the creational presence and the application of the creational laws. He or she possesses a spiritual image of the power of the creation's presence, and he or she dedicates all the precious energies of his or her life and being to the creational knowledge, its truth, power, and essence of wisdom, and thereby to the ability of his or her part of the creation which lives within him or her, his or her spirit. The material life on the earth is like a transitory game, a phenomenon that dissipates, but behind it lies the eternal and timeless truth, the spirit, the creational presence, and the reality of the creation. This creational reality bears within it all realms and domains of the capability of essence of wisdom. This is the lasting, the timelessly permanent and immortal. This is not a game, but eternal and timeless truth and essence of wisdom, knowledge, freedom, love, logic, and ability, the relative absolutely full development, the absolute distinctness. Very many human beings fear to live in the sense of the creation, and they think and assume that they would only have to remain with the one which is to take away their anxiety about the death, with a God of a religion who has promised them in conscious irrational teaching and for his entirely own benefit, to take away their anxiety about the death if they would in irrational belief and submissively believe his lies, whereby they get into his enslavement and become consciousness-based unfree. The steady repetition of this irrational religious teaching has the effect that the believers find an imaginary and deceptive fulfillment and are subject to an evil delusion which cuts them off from all consciousness-based rationality, whereby also their spiritual intellectual thinking is impeded and suppressed and enslaved. Only very few people do not fear to live in the sense of the creation and know that this alone guarantees the life and the being, because thereby the creational laws are fulfilled, and these in turn transform the life and the being into the life and being.